All right, these are fancy pants Gringo tacos with a bunch of homemade stuff. All right, so crispy tacos. You know, I grew up in the U.S. where we had crispy shelled tacos, both at home. You know, my mom would make it out of like an old El Paso or maybe an Ortega kit. We also had taco days at school, where there was just like a big taco bar, you know, and you get your crispy shell. They'd slop in the meat. You could put whatever toppings you want on it, and that was your lunch. And I love those. You know, it's like what you get at a Taco Bell. You know, the crispy shelled tacos. I love them. When it comes to tacos, you know, I know there was a period of time, and perhaps that time still exists, when people were real snobby about tacos. And if you say you like crispy shelled tacos, they'd be like, oh, but those aren't real tacos. And maybe that's true. Maybe they aren't the original taco. That said, you know, foods develop and foods change, and I think there are ways to make real excellent crispy shelled tacos. You know, I'm not above using the kits. I still make the kits for my kids sometimes, and we love those kit taco nights where you just get the packet of powder and add it to a pot full of ground beef. That said, you can make them a lot better if you start with some ingredients from scratch. So I've got a few chilies here. These are California chilies, you know, so they're dried Anaheims, essentially, ripe dried Anaheim chilies. And then these are ancho chilies, which have so the Anaheims have like a sort of more bright, fresh chili flavor, a little bit of heat to them, but not a ton. Although you can get versions like hatch chilies, which are a variant of an Anaheim, have a little more heat to them. And the ancho chilies have a sort of more fruity, kind of raisiny aroma to them, without much heat at all. But all I'm doing is taking out the seeds and ribs. The way I like to do that, I use scissors, and I just cut off the top of the chili, like maybe an inch down from where the stem is, you know? And then you get this side of it, and you can slit it open, and then open it up. And generally, you know, the seeds will just kind of take care of themselves, but you can rub out any extra ones. And then rub straight into your eyes, yeah. Or go to the bathroom. And then this little bit, you can then snip off the stem, and then this sort of inner core bit will pop out also, and you can get rid of the seeds. The reason you get rid of the seeds is because there's not much flavor in the seeds, and there tends to be more heat in the seeds and the ribs. So if you want to make your chili a little milder, you can get rid of the seeds and ribs. It also makes the texture a little nicer, I think. So once you have your chilies, you know, I have a recipe, an old recipe on Serious Eats, and in my book, The Food Lab, for a Texas-style chile con carne, which uses bigger chunks of beef. And in that one, I also recommend adding some ancho chili. Some arbol chilies, so little hot chilies to here. The idea is that you want this sort of mix of kind of fruity, bright and fresh, and hot flavors. The arbol chilies are where the heat comes from. But in this case, you know, my daughter's we're having a bunch of her friends over. It's the middle of the summer. Well, I guess you're probably watching this in September, but my daughter's having some of her friends and parents over. We're gonna have a little taco party. And so I want to keep this relatively mild so that everyone can enjoy it, even the people who don't like that much heat. So I got my pan here, sort of medium heat, and we're just going to toast these chilies just a little bit to kind of develop their flavor and draw some of that flavor out. You'll start to smell it when it hits the pan. They have a really beautiful sort of fruity aroma as they toast. If there's one thing you can do to up your chili game, you know, whether it's a ground beef chili, whether you put beans in it or not, whether it's this sort of taco mix that I'm making here, is to use whole dried chilies that you get fresh, as opposed to chili powder. Once a vegetable gets ground up into a powder, you greatly increase its surface area and avenues for the aroma to start to escape. You know, if you're smelling something in your kitchen, or you're smelling something in the spice jar, it means that it's no longer in that spice jar, and so it's not going to make its way into your food. So starting with dried chilies is just going to give you much, much better flavor. I'm also going to go in here with about a tablespoon and a half of cumin that we're going to give a little toast. We don't want these things to burn, so it's a real sort of gentle toast. You'll see how the cumin start to sort of crackle and pop a bit. You don't want it to get black or anything though. So as soon as you really smell that nice aroma, we're gonna go in with some chicken stock. So cup of chicken stock here, low sodium, so that you can control the salt at the end. And then we'll just let this simmer just a little bit until those chilies are kind of softened up, you know. That smells really good. In the meantime, I'm gonna dice up half an onion here. This recipe, you know, it takes a little bit more equipment and a few more sort of specialized ingredients than just buying the packet from the supermarket shelf, but it's honestly not that much harder. You know, essentially we are just going to brown beef and then add flavoring to it. It's just that we're making our own flavoring rather than relying on a pack. All right, so once our chilies are sort of softened up, we transfer this all to a container. Alicia and her friend Carrie are building the world's biggest fort. So it covers the entire playroom and extends down the hall into Alicia's room. They've been working on it since yesterday. So get all those big chunks out into this container. And we'll also get the rest of that liquid into here. Make sure we get all those little bits of delicious cumin seed. Okay. I'm going to add just a little bit more water, just enough to sort of give it a covering. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these tortilla chips. So I was going to use maseca, you know, so the dried, ground, pre-cooked cornmeal, you know, dried masa that you use to make tortillas with. But I opened up the bag and it had gone a little rancid because I've had it for a long time. So I am using these whole corn chips instead, which will grind up and sort of form like a corn paste. And that's going to give our beef mixture a little bit of sort of body, so that it's nice and tight and not watery. In the meantime, I'm going to start sauteing those onions. So a little bit of oil in there. Onions in. You could also go in with some garlic if you want, or if you want it a little hotter, you could put some, you know, like chopped up fresh serrano chilies, something like that. But we're going to keep it nice and mild today. All right, so let me grab my hand blender. You could do this in a regular blender, obviously, but we're going hand blender today. Nice sizzle going on in those onions. All right, and then we're just going to puree this. If you're the kind of person who makes a lot of chili at home, you know, my kids love chili. What you can do is make a big batch of this stuff. You know, do like a dozen of each chili. Make a big batch of it and then just freeze it in containers. You could put it into like, divide it into little deli containers, sort of pint-sized deli containers, and then throw them in the freezer. And then whenever you're making chili, all you have to do is pull one out and let it, you know, melt into your stock as you're braising your meat, or as you're cooking your ground beef. And at that point, it becomes just as fast as using a packet. If you especially like that sort of fruity ancho flavor, but don't really want any heat at all, you could use just a couple of anchos, but then up that fruitiness by throwing some raisins in there also. You know, they have a sort of very similar sort of sweetness to them, and they'll help cut some of that heat. But there's not really much heat at all in an ancho. All right, so going in with some ground beef. I'm just gonna let that brown off. From here on out, it's exactly like making taco meat from a mix. You can drain off the fat if you like. I'll probably drain off just a little bit of it. Really depends on how fatty your beef is and how fatty you want your final mixture to be. I don't mind there being like a little bit of extra flavorful fat in there, but you don't want like an oil slick on top, you know? Going high heat right now, just to get this cooked off as well as possible. You know, when people say, you know, brown your ground beef in a situation like this, it's sometimes confusing whether it really means like, you know, let it cook until it's really actually brown, or just let it cook until it's no longer pink anymore. And there's a trade-off with those two things, you know, that if you let your beef cook until it is really, really brown, it actually takes a surprisingly long amount of time, because you have to boil off all the moisture from it first before the fat, you know, before the temperature in the pan, the temperature of the fat can get hot enough to actually start triggering those browning reactions, those Maillard reactions. So it can take a long, long time, you know, 20, 30 minutes maybe even, depending on how much meat you have and the power of your burner. Typically, when you know, in most recipes, like this one, or say you're making a bolognese, typically you don't actually have to let the individual pieces of beef brown off completely. Oftentimes you're going to be adding other ingredients to it that are going to bring a lot of flavor to them, so you don't really need to rely on that sort of browned beef Maillard flavor. The other issue with completely browning your beef is that it can actually turn quite tough. You know, when beef starts to brown, the proteins tighten up and it gets really dry, and so rather than having a sort of luscious, moist quality to it, velvety quality to it, instead it can sort of turn kind of pebbly and tough. You have little bits of tough cooked beef in your sauce, as opposed to a really nice tender sauce. So I'm not going to let this completely brown. I'm just going to make sure that it's no longer pink and that some of that moisture has evaporated off before I go in and add my chili puree. I'm also going to hit it with just a little bit of oregano. This is like Calabrian oregano, which is not the right oregano for this dish. You should really be using a Mexican oregano, but this is what I have, so that's what I'm using. And once we sort of hear it starting to convert from a simmering sound to a more of like a sizzling, frying sound, that's when you know sort of most of the moisture has, at least the moisture's at a place where it's not going to make this sort of soupy and watery, and where you're starting to get little bits of browning here and there. All right, so I'm going to go in with my chili puree now. And so far this is completely unseasoned, so no salt in here, but we will season it up with some salt. Make sure all those other flavors can come out. You can put the most flavorful, most aromatic ingredients in the world in a dish, and if there isn't any salt in it to sort of, you know, activate those nerve pathways in your tongue, you're not going to really, it's not really going to taste like much. It'll smell good, but you put it in your mouth and it'll taste bland. Salt is kind of a essential element to making food taste good. I'm actually going to use this salt and MSG blend. It's a little bit of MSG and a lot of salt. Also, splash of soy sauce, which I like to do just to give it a little bit more of a rich sort of umami bite to it. We are sort of just about there. It's honestly really fast and easy. It's going to taste much better than the packet stuff will. Not that there's anything wrong with the packet stuff, but this will be better. Promise. Let's give it a taste and taste for our salt level. That is delicious. Wow, yeah, real good. This is gonna be good in our tacos. So it's a taco party. So I am also gonna be making some pico de gallo, some charred jalapeno, some charred tomatillo salsa, probably a little guacamole, as well as all the other accompaniments that go on here. If you want to see me making those and you want to get those recipes, you can find those on my Patreon. The video and the recipes are going to be on my Patreon. But I'll be back when all that's done, and I'll show you how I'm going to put my taco party together, all right? So I will see you in. All right, so we got our taco party ready. I've made my homemade whole chili ground beef mixture. We've got our charred tomatillo salsa. I've got some pico de gallo, got some guacamole, and then I've got your sort of standard toppings, sour cream. I got some black olives. I'm doing shredded cabbage. Normally I would do shredded iceberg, but I had cabbage in my fridge, so I used that. Pre-shredded Mexican cheese blend, diced tomatoes, some limes. You could probably go do with some pickled jalapenos in here as well, maybe some diced onions if you prefer, if you like those, but I think this is a good start. I'm gonna make myself one and then save the rest for the party. You know, and the real question is, what order do you stack your tacos in? So what I've learned is that if you start with a layer of cheese on the bottom, okay, and then you go in with your warm meat mixture on top of that, the cheese kind of melts and protects the hinge. And that way, when you bite into it, there's less of a chance that it's going to all just crumble apart. Although, to be honest, I don't mind when it all just kind of crumbles apart. I'll put a little bit of cabbage in there. What am I going to go with on this one? Let's say some guacamole. Let's do a little sour cream. And some olives. And let's finish it off. I'll skip the pico and tomatoes on this one. We'll finish it off with some salsa. All right. These are fancy pants Gringo tacos with a bunch of homemade stuff. You could go all out and make your own homemade shells, but today we're using store-bought. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, what I would do is on taco night, we would eat tacos over a plate, and then as things sort of dripped down and fell on your plate, at the end we would just make a big taco salad, kind of stir it up, and eat it with a fork. But crispy tacos are meant to be messy. All right, happy Taco Tuesday. I'm gonna take these up to the taco party. The other kids should be coming soon. Guys, gals, non-binary pals. I'll see you next time. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. You can find the full article and recipe along with bonus content and my newsletter for free on my Patreon. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more videos like this, or my alternate channel, Kenji Lopez Main, for my dining content. And follow me on Instagram at Kenji Lopez-Alt for daily updates. You can also get signed and personalized copies of any of my books. That's The Food Lab, The Walk, or my children's book, Every Night is Pizza Night, shipped from Book Larder here in Seattle. Find the links to all of this, as well as all of the tools I used in today's video, in the description below. Thanks.